Hey, remember that time we were talking about upgrading the little office server that keeps crashing whenever we spin up a new VM? I could see the hesitation in your eyes spending a chunk of cash on a machine that looks impressive on paper but ends up collecting dust because it doesn't actually fit the workflow. That feeling of, am I really getting my money's worth? Is exactly why I wanted to break down the HPE Proliant DL380 super high-end virtualization configuration before you click Add to Cart. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's get the context straight. This isn't a consumer-grade desktop or a cheap rack unit you toss into a closet. It's a 12-bay, 2.5-inch compatible, 2U rack server aimed squarely at businesses that need to run a serious number of virtual machines, containers, or even a small private cloud. The headline spec sheet reads, 22-core, 256 gigabytes RAM, 8 terabytes RAID. And that alone can feel like a safety net for anyone worried about resource exhaustion. But the real question is, does that safety net translate into day-to-day reliability? And does it justify the price tag for the kind of workload you actually have? I spent a good part of the weekend pulling a similar DL380 out of a used server shop, slotting in the exact parts listed: 22-core Xeon E5 2699V4, 42 terabytes, 7.2K SAS drives, and the Smart Array P440AR controller and wiring it into my home lab. The process itself gave me a feel for the hidden trade-offs that most spec sheets gloss over. The first thing you notice is the sheer physical heft of the chassis. The rails included in the package make mounting it in a standard 42U rack straightforward, but you still need to allocate a dedicated power strip that can handle two 800W power supplies. That's not a problem for a data center or a server room, but for a small office with limited rack space, you're essentially committing to a permanent footprint. If you're the kind of buyer who likes to shuffle hardware around or who only has a half rack to work with, this could become a logistical headache. Now, about the CPU and memory. The 22 cores are spread over 2 sockets, meaning you have a true dual processor setup. In my tests, when I spun up a mix of Windows Server 2019 and Ubuntu MS with heavy SQL workloads, others running lightweight web services, the CPU never hit a bottleneck until I pushed beyond 12 active cores. That tells you the chip is more than enough for a moderate virtualization environment, but you also have to consider the licensing model of the operating systems you'll run. Microsoft, for instance, charges per core, so you're looking at a potentially steep software cost that isn't reflected in the hardware price. If you're planning to stick with open source OSes or have existing core licenses, you'll get the most bang for this buck. If not, the hardware might feel like a bargain, but the total cost of ownership could balloon. The 256 gigabytes of RAM is the next big talking point. With that amount, you can comfortably allocate 8 gigabytes to a dozen VMs and still have headroom for in-memory caching or a small database. The real-world advantage showed up when I enabled VMware SC's transparent page sharing. The memory consumption dipped noticeably because the hypervisor could deduplicate identical pages across VMs. However, if you're running memory-intensive workloads like large Java application servers, you'll still find yourself topping out faster than you'd expect. The good news is the DL380 supports up to 3 terabytes of RAM, so you can future-proof by adding more DIMMs later, but that means additional investment in compatible memory modules. Storage is where the 8 terabytes RAID claim can both impress and surprise. The 2 terabytes 7.2K SAS drives, paired with the P440AR controller, default to a RAID 10 configuration for a balance of performance and redundancy. In practice, read speeds hovered around 150 megabytes per second per drive, and write speeds were a bit lower due to the 7.2K spin rate. If your workload is I/O-heavy, think large video transcoding or a high-transaction database, you'll feel the latency compared to an NVMe-based storage array. On the other hand, for typical Liniof business applications, the RAID 10 setup gave me the peace of mind of instant failover without a noticeable dip in responsiveness. The trade-off, of course, is that you're using half the raw capacity for redundancy, so you end up with roughly 4 terabytes of usable space out of the advertised 8 terabytes. Network connectivity is another area that can make or break the experience. The included 10 gigabits Ethernet adapter, HP561FLRT, plugs directly into the server's mezzanine slot and provides 2 10 gigabits ports. When I connected it to a 10 gigabit switch and ran iPerf tests, I consistently saw close to 9.5 gigabits per second throughput, which is ample for a virtualized environment where VMs need to talk to each other quickly. If your current infrastructure is still on 1 gigabit Ethernet, you'll have to invest in a new switch or a dedicated uplink, adding another line item to the budget. So, who should actually consider buying this Proliant DL380? First, small to mid-sized businesses that